afternoon for everyone here. Probably good evening, as Jivko said, if anyone joins us from the Americas as well. I mean, it's a real pleasure really to be here today. Obviously, it would have been much better to be in person in Tashkent and have the chance to meet all of you and have a live event. But unfortunately, this is the current situation, and we have to do or we have to live with it. And therefore, I'm very pleased to be here today and I have the chance to give you a bit of an update of how we see the situation and the developments in the region. Not so much focusing on the short term and the impact of COVID, obviously, which is in everyone's mind, but more looking on the medium long-term development that we've seen and that we expect to happen in the years to come, and their impact on the industry. It's a relatively short presentation, but I know we've got time for questions and a discussion later on. So first of all, this is the kind of development in terms of petrochemical capacities in the region. So looking at Russia, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. And this is those capacities for the top 6 base chemicals. So mainly looking at methanol, ethylene, propylene, the light olefins, the aromatics, as well as chlorine. And over the last 10 years, so from 2010 to 2020, we have seen capacities growing by about 7 million metric tons over that period, moving from slightly above 15 million metric tons to just about 22, 23 million metric tons. And that's equivalent to about a 4% cumulative growth rate. So a healthy growth rate, slightly above the general trend that we've seen globally in terms of expansion for petrochemical capacities. And if we look at 2020 itself, we can see that methanol remains the key chemical. So methanol has historically been the largest chemical produced in the region, especially with units in Russia. And that still remains the case with about 27% of total capacities. Ethylene comes second, and with the recent developments on ethylene capacities, it has kind of grown significantly and now accounts for pretty much the same size as the methanol capacity, so about 27 million metric tons. 27% of the total volume, and then we've got propylene with a slightly lower share, 17%, and then the aromatics, which have increased slightly, but no significant changes in the last few years, and finally chlorine, which has remained relatively stable. So a picture that really focuses, as you can imagine, on products coming from the light feedstock. So whether we're talking about methane for methanol or ethane and LPG for the light olefins. And this is another way to look at capacity development. So this is now not looking at cumulative capacities, but year-on-year growth in terms of new capacities. So for the same period, 2010 to 2020, and we've got a breakdown for each of those different base chemicals. So whether we're talking again about methanol, light olefins, aromatics, and chlorine. And what we can see here is really over the last 6-7 years, so since pretty much 2014, we have seen a continuous growth in terms of new capacities, with about 600,000 metric tons of new capacities across those 6 products being commissioned. And then obviously the second main aspect is 2020, which has been really the outlier in terms of capacity development, with the development and the commissioning of the Zapsik-Neftekhim project towards the end of 2019, but we really included it in 2020 in our statistics. And then when you look at the capacity development by product, I mean, we can see healthy and steady growth on the methanol side, either through capacity expansion at existing units or small new capacities, such as the Chikinoaz unit, for example. We have seen some healthy development on the ethylene side lately. So since 2016, as I mentioned, with different kind of project being commissioned. And then on the propylene side, we really had a period in 2013, 14, 15, where we had a combination of PDH units and units in Uzbekistan starting up. And then the next big development is obviously, again, the Sapsik Neftahim propylene and downstream polypropylene project. And then on the other chemicals, so we have seen some development on the benzene side, to a certain extent on chlorine and xylene as well, but really to a much smaller extent. And the other interesting aspect is when we look at those projects, and it's just a summary of the key development that we've seen in the last few years. And on the table on the right is basically, obviously, Russia has been a key driver behind those projects. Number of projects, but also the size of those projects, with, as I said, Sapsik Neftahim, to a certain extent, the PDH Tobolsk project in 2014, and then more recently Chikhino Azot and so on. But we have seen development across several countries in the region. So we're obviously talking about the recent development in Turkmenistan as Azerbaijan on the polymer side, to a lower extent. So we've seen Uzbekistan developing its petchem, and we have seen a few projects starting up a few years ago, more recently than Novaya Azot, which is in commissioning phase, I believe, and then in Kazakhstan as well. So really kind of a development across a number of countries in the region, and really driving this growth in terms of capacities. But what is interesting is this project that we've seen is probably just the start of a wave of development that we expect in the region. And on this map, so you can see a few projects. It's not all the current units operating, but it's just those latest projects that have been commissioned in the last few years that I mentioned. So the Uskor gas cracker and downstream units. The two SOCAR, the SOCAR polymer and the SOCAR methanol units, the Turkmen gas polymer project, and Chikhino Azot and Sapsik. So it's just those few projects that really kind of changed, I would say, the industry in the last few years in the industry, on top of more legacy projects and units. But as I said, what is interesting is more what's going to come next, and certainly we have seen a lot of developments and a lot of interest from different players, very diverse range of players, to benefit from the competitiveness and the accessibility of the feedstock to develop new projects. And this is just a few that I mentioned here. Not that we expect, I would say, all of them to come on stream necessarily in the short, medium term, but certainly projects that we believe have some strong ground in terms of potential development. So there is a gas-based polymer project in the Ust-Luga region, the Baltic Chemical Complex. There is other polymer projects, so the NK project, and obviously project within Russia, but more on the Far East and focusing on the Asian region. So whether we're talking about the Sibur Amur project or the NFP, the Nakhodka methanol project as well, really those projects are focusing on mainly China and have little implication, I would say, within the region that we're talking about today. But I think what is interesting is more project that we see, and the next wave in the region is really around Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and I mean that's really the focus on today's conference, and I'm really looking forward to hear from the different companies and colleagues from those projects. But certainly, obviously, the KPI PDH project, which has been slightly delayed, I believe, but is expected to come on stream in the next year or so. There is an ethane-based cracker project as well in Kazakhstan, the KLPE, which we believe as well has some strong ground, and we're really looking forward to see what are the latest development there. And then really Uzbekistan, and as I said, I wish we were in Tashkent today, but Uzbekistan is really the place where we've seen a healthy growth in terms of new projects as well as upgrades of existing projects. So there is obviously the Chertan, the cracker, the SGCC projects, and capacity expansion. And then those two MTO projects, the Shoran SGCOC, and the recently renamed with the involvement of CHISAC on the MTO. So really, as I said, a lot of development and a lot of potential based on competitive and accessible feedstock. A lot of those projects tend to focus on polymers, and that's definitely something that is worth keeping an eye on as well. One last slide in terms of the way we look at those projects and their development is looking at what we call the net export position of the region. So it's really looking at across those 6 products, looking at imports and exports in the region. So obviously historical trades, but most importantly, what we see as a forecast, a lot of those projects tend to be export orientated, and therefore how we see those projects being developed, how we see trade, import, and most importantly, as I said, export developing in the coming years. And finally, and especially in the case of ethylene and propylene, we're not just looking at export of the product itself, but we also include exports of the downstream products. So obviously, if you have an ethylene cracker, you're not going to ship and export your ethylene, but you're going to go downstream into different polyethylene and ship your polyethylene. And therefore, we look at those polyethylene and polypropylene mainly, but also the derivatives, but mainly those polymers. We look at the net trade position, and we refer to them in terms of ethylene equivalent or propylene equivalent. So that really gives you, I would say, a detailed picture and a real picture of the actual net trade of the value chain, and not just the feedstock or the building blocks. And what is really interesting is if you look at the last 10 years again, methanol has been a consistent net export, mainly, as I said, with capacities in Russia being exporting into West Europe. And we have seen, as new capacities come on stream, we have seen new export of methanol growing slightly, but not significantly, just a steady growth, I would say. Ethylene is, as I said, not shipped as ethylene, but mainly into the downstream product. And ethylene has been a net import in the region. So overall, the CIS has imported more, mainly polyethylene that has exported, showing a deficit. And on the other hand, for the case of propylene, it has been a net import of propylene, or relatively balanced in terms of propylene. But with the development of the latest project, as I said, on one hand, the PDH project in Russia in 2014-15, and then the subsequent new units in Uzbekistan, and so on, we have seen a slightly growing net export of propylene equivalent since 2015. So overall, slowly kind of growing trend of exports, with mainly methanol to a lower extent, propylene, a little bit of benzene being the key products exported, and ethylene being imported. And you can see, I mean, there's no surprise here, but with the latest development, and mainly the subsequent Neftekhim project in 2020, so earlier this year, exports overall are expected to grow, but most importantly, ethylene and ethylene equivalent are expected to switch from being a net importer within the region to a net exporter, with about an export of 1 million metric tons, so slightly less than that. So significant. And as we see, based on the map I just mentioned, new projects coming on stream, we see these trends growing. So we see export growing significantly and moving from probably just about 2 million metric tons overall for the 6 products in 2019 to well above 6 million metric tons in 2025 and about 11 million metric tons in 2028. And as you can see, methanol is growing slightly with new projects, and especially projects in the Far East targeting Asia. But most importantly, ethylene and to a lower extent, propylene are growing significantly. And that's really reflecting on the new projects coming on stream or expected to come on stream, and based on light feedstock. Propylene, as I said, not so much pressure, but growing in terms of net export, and then obviously benzene as well, as we see small new projects coming on stream. So really we see changes, structural changes in the market, and we expect those structural changes to change the dynamic of those downstream products within the region. And so to conclude, just as I mentioned, a lot of project developments in the region, projects that have come on stream in the last few years, but most importantly, probably this is just the beginning of a wave of projects which are based on monetization of competitive and accessible feedstock, but also in the case of Russia and other countries, favorable fiscal regimes that tend to spur those investments. Structural changes, so the consequence of those new capacities is obviously either existing players putting new capacities, or in some cases new players entering the market. So that changed the structure of the downstream product market, with pressure both on terms of competition if we see new players, but also in terms of prices, and prices, the way prices are set up domestically are very different, whether the market is a net import or a net export market. A lot of question around the demand, because normally when we see new capacities coming on stream, that tends to spur the downstream demand in terms of compounders, when we talk about resin, converters as well, and then further downstream industries into consumer packaging, automotive, and so on. And therefore there is a close watch as well regarding the development of the demand, and how those new projects on the petrochemical side really support and drive new demand. A lot of projects are export orientated, at least at the beginning, and therefore there is an increased dependence on export markets and how those export markets behave, but also how the other regions are evolving. So the CIS is probably less kind of is more open to the wider market dynamics that we see globally. Finally, we see all those new projects coming on stream, a lot of those projects having quite similar configuration, and therefore the first who comes on stream would certainly have an advantage in terms of setting up its logistic and marketing strategy. And therefore, on top of the first mover advantage is a push towards more diversification and a new range of products in order to compete head-to-head with either existing or new projects that would come ahead beforehand. And with that, I believe I'm done. Talgat, thank you very much. And